I'm recording the podcast downstairs today, and while I was starting to record this podcast, or trying to record this podcast, one of our cats had a coughing fit, which just reminds me associated with what the past 11 weeks has been. For periods of time over the past 11 weeks, I haven't been able to breathe or talk or do anything. The plaster dust, the quantity of plaster dust that has come into the general air around us has been absolutely extreme. For 2 weeks, we had to leave the house because the electrical work was supposed to be off. But actually, I probably need to describe this process to just elaborate on what has been going on. Since we moved into the house, it was clear that the electricals here needed to be replaced at some stage. We have a toaster oven and a microwave in the kitchen. Previously, you couldn't run both of them at the same time. There were a series of conditions with heaters and other things where the electrical work just wouldn't keep up and it would just shut itself off. So through winter, we used oil radiators spread out loosely through the house to keep things warm. But you couldn't run blower heaters. You couldn't really run anything that drained slightly more electricity or it would shut everything off. And certainly we were the last house when there were blackouts to come back on. We had a series of things which just indicated that we had original electrics and there needed to be an upgrade. This came to a head in the past 6 months because my wife wanted to add heating and cooling to the house, heating and air conditioning. And it was clear that the electrics in the house wouldn't keep up with that. So to facilitate the heating and air conditioning being installed in the house, we went out and tried to find electricians in the area. We spoke with 4 separate electricians. One didn't show. One was incredibly curious when he showed up and he didn't give us a quote. But the 2 that gave us quotes were at 2 extremes. One of them was a local company that sent out a guy, and this was a guy who came twice to the house. The first time he came, he took a call in our kitchen while I was in the living room and had a conversation with one of his guys about how he was going to charge a single woman more money and how the guy who was with the single woman currently, giving her a quote, should talk up a variety of things in order to, justify the exorbitant quote that he was going to give her. And that seemed very strange. I gave this guy a list of things that we needed, just ways that we broke down the cost. And he turned up a week later. This was the second day maybe, that the fellow from Australia was staying with us. And proceeded to do none of that and just proceeded to give us this quote, which was more than 3 times the quote that we ended up going with. Now, the gentleman who was the quote that we ended up going with had done work on our neighbours' houses. And he came, he seemed very reasonable, he was kind of softly spoken, and he gave us a quote which looked fine. I mean, it was more than or less than a third what the other outfit had done. But it was clear the other outfit just had ridiculous padding and wasn't really interested in anything. So based on this, we engaged with, I don't even know what one would call it. I mean, it was, I guess, a contract where we paid 20% up front or something like that. And he proceeded to turn up a couple of weeks later and wrap a number of our rooms in plastic. Now, this was the start of the past 11 weeks. And at the time when we started, we had no way of knowing that it was going to take as long as it was going to take. And we were also told that it wasn't going to be very invasive, and it was incredibly invasive. Now, the nut who didn't give us a quote said that he was going to have to pull out all the walls. This outfit that ended up doing the electrical work didn't pull out all the walls, but they did do a lot of sawzall cutting and removed large chunks of the walls in a number of areas, kind of excessively in some regard. And this created a huge amount of dust. But the main disruption came through the fact that they were working on 2, maybe 3 other jobs while they were working on our house, which meant in any given week they would spend maybe 12 hours, 20 if we were lucky, actually in the house working. So we just had to deal with the house being in this condition for 11 weeks. And there were 2 weeks where we were out of the house. Now, we were originally told 1 week. We booked a week in an Airbnb. Actually, we were originally told 4 days. And we booked a week in Airbnb to give them extra time. They weren't done, so we moved into a hotel. And what we realized through that process was that they were working probably, if we were lucky, in the week we were out, they probably, if we were lucky, put in maybe 20 hours, probably closer to 12. So really, they were doing other jobs. our job wasn't that important to them. But we couldn't live in our house. Like, our house was actually causing us problems. We reinforced our bedroom. We tried to make the bedroom the kind of sanctum through this period, but the rest of the house was incredibly dusty. And listening to my poor cat's hack cough for 5 minutes before I started this podcast recording, I realized that we actually weren't the greatest sufferers through this thing. Our poor cats were the greatest sufferers through this thing. Anyway, there were many parts to this. There was the kind of mafioso plasterer who just behaved very curiously. There was the guy who was the electrician's offsider who brought his pit bulls, lived in the car. Actually, they literally lived in the car because the guy was living with his pregnant girlfriend's mother in their apartment, and the pit bulls had to live in the car. So the pit bulls came here and they lived in the car. So, the car was here. The pit bulls were here. Sometimes one of them got out, all this kind of stuff. The guy beat the pit bull with its leash. Just all this kind of craziness that we just had to live with because we were getting our electrics worked on. And apparently this is what happens when you get your electrics worked on. You just have to deal with whatever insanity is going on. So the guy worked on the electrics, and at some stage we realized that we needed to the plastering had to be done because obviously if you pull plastering out, you have to replace that. So we had to get a plasterer and a painter, and of course the electrician had his guy to do that. The electrician nominally finished the work after about week 9. However, there were 3 rooms where the outlets didn't work. And he would text us these very condescending things like, oh, we'd done something wrong, and we needed to do this, and we needed to do that, and I never said I have a degree in experimental physics. I'm perfectly capable of checking these things. I just insisted that he come back and actually repair the stuff. And the final stage was the painter plasterer who was here for about 3 weeks, and he didn't finish. We have rooms that are still partially plastered and unpainted just because we got to the stage where we just had to get this insanity out of our house. Like, we'd gone on for too long. We both were just in stages of, inability to speak, inability to breathe, inability, to process a bunch of other stuff. We've got other nonsense going on currently. And having the house in complete disarray with these people that just didn't have any prioritization associated with the work that they were doing was really extreme. The painter worked even less than the electrician. He said he'd come on days, he wouldn't show up on days. In any given week, he'd work maybe 2.5 days, including insisting on coming on Saturday, but then he'd arrive on Saturday at about 11, leave at about 2. So we were obviously just providing pocket money fill-in jobs for these people. Now, when the painter left, he took a bunch of stuff that wasn't his. He took a bunch of electrical outlets, what they call BCFI or whatever CFI outlets, which, ironically, my wife had already gotten a refund on, but still $300 worth of stuff that he just took with him. Wasn't his stuff, he just took it when he left. And he and the electrician had an interesting relationship because he was still calling the electrician and providing the electrician updates periodically. So I'm assuming those outlets went back to the electrician. My wife pointed out we've already gotten the refund on them, but it's kind of curious that you have this stuff taken after the fact. This wasn't their stuff, it was our stuff. And it makes me wonder as we go through things, just what on earth this thing has meant. Like, where we are in our general psychology. So we now have a house that has power, nominally. We haven't checked all the outlets. The majority of the outlets we checked still work. And we can nominally use more stuff in the house. We normally can get heating and air conditioning and all these other things. But the whole nature of what one's word is, what your word is, like, you say you're going to turn up on a day, you don't turn up. You don't turn up the next day, The whole nature of the way people operate here is very, very strange. It's very alien to me, and it's also strangely alien to my wife. And my wife's from Southern California. I mean, she's not from Northern California. But the whole way that people behave here is so completely different. And professionally, there's no way I could behave like this professionally, right? So it's like there's a different way of doing things. And one might say, devil's advocate, the company that charged more than 3 times as much probably would have done it faster, probably would have done things better, probably would have been out of the house in maybe 8 weeks. maybe 6 weeks, potentially. Who the hell knows? Maybe. Do you want to pay 3.5 times as much to have that possibility? I mean, the people that were 3.5 times as much were clearly interested in scamming people up front. They had that telephone conversation in earshot. Very strange thing that people assume because you don't come from this country that you're just an idiot, right? The company that charged 3.5 times as much showed me the bill, what they'd allocated stuff for. I read it once. I could recite it back to the guy. I'm numerically literate. They assumed I wasn't numerically literate. That having looked at something once, they would need to do all this other additional dancing associated with that. I think when you deal with these kind of things, when you deal with any kind of home renovations, particularly in this part of the world, I'm talking about San Jose, California specifically, you've just got to assume a different level of entity, And what I've experienced through this thing has taught me very strongly that I want to minimize the amount of home repairs I do in the future, quite literally, in this part of the world. So, yes, we will get a heating and air conditioning person in at some stage, and I don't know what we'll do through that time, but I've said to my wife, we need a few months off from this thing. We need to get back into being humans again. Our cats need to stop coughing. I need to be able to breathe, My wife's craft room never got painted. It got plastered, but never got painted. She was willing to take that one for the team. My podcasting room thankfully got painted. It was one of the early ones that got painted. So, yeah, we've got a downstairs bathroom, downstairs kind of room that the cats are in, storage room that's still got plaster, not painted. My wife's craft room's not painted. She did paint the exit area, kind of the back kitchen pantry on the way out. So that she painted quite proudly when the guy didn't show the painted plasterer. So, yeah, I don't know what one learns from this thing. One just learns that one's word is a very precious commodity and you really need to minimize the contact that you have with the outside world for a series of things. So that was our experience here, a learning experience, but one actually that I think we just are looking forward to forgetting in the foreseeable future.